How many of us have lived our lives up until these last 5 weeks, wondering what it would be like to be part of a revolution? Well, here we are. Two observers reflected on this in different ways in the last few days. Author Jeffrey Tucker described the efforts of Doge and Maha and MAGA as epic in scope, breaking a century of pathetic acquiescence toward the deep, middle, and shallow states, at last using moral courage to confront the problem head on. Economic forecaster Martin Armstrong took a slightly shorter time frame, but he reached the same conclusion in a post entitled, "The Neocon coup that has controlled the United States for 26 years is coming to an end." I would rephrase that to say the British imperial coup over post-World War II foreign policy is coming to an end after 80 years. And then from the other side, check out this Financial Times headline: "The U.S. is now the enemy of the West." I'm Susan Kokinda, and in this midweek update, I'm going to look at the revolutions unfolding in foreign policy, especially U.S. and Russian relations, and in economic policy. Let's start with the February 23rd interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin, posted on the Kremlin website, because his remarks straddle both foreign and economic policy. Russian journalist Zarubin began the interview by asking Putin what he thought about President Trump's demand to Ukraine for access to its rare earth minerals. While Putin deferred that direct question by saying it has nothing to do with us, he quickly turned the discussion to economic cooperation with the United States. He said, "It's important to emphasize that Russia possesses significantly, and I want to stress this, significantly larger resources of this kind than Ukraine. Developing these resources requires substantial capital investment, and we would be happy to cooperate with any foreign partners, including American companies." Putin returned again and again to such cooperation with the United States, using the example of aluminum production, describing the importance of aluminum as, first of all, about energy, preferably cheap energy, and referencing its role in hydropower in that respect. He discussed how the United States and Russia could mutually benefit from Russian investment in the United States and vice versa. The interview concluded with the interviewer asking the following: "President Trump said the United States and Russia were discussing major economic projects as part of the Ukraine talks." And Putin responded, "Yes, some of our respective companies are in contact and are discussing such projects." So, to borrow from Elon Musk's now famous phrase and meme, let that sink in. Not too many months ago, in the weeks between the November election and the inauguration, the United States and Russia were teetering on the brink of nuclear confrontation, thanks to the machinations of the NATO countries and their British overlords. Now Donald Trump is proposing denuclearization, and Putin elaborated on Trump's initial proposal to cut defense spending by 50%. Putin said, "We could come to an agreement with the United States, and we're not against it. I think this is a good idea. The United States would cut their spending by 50%. We would cut ours by 50%. The People's Republic of China could then join in if it wants to. We think this is a good proposal." Promethean Action's Brian Lance has written extensively on the economic implications of this, not just from the standpoint of saving money, and for that matter, preventing World War III, but from the even more important standpoint of freeing up some of our country's most skilled workers that are in the defense sector and putting their vital skills to work in rebuilding the domestic economy. In a short post on our website and a longer post on his Substack channel, Brian reports that there are approximately 1.2 million workers as part of the aerospace and defense supply chain of small and medium manufacturers. And he stresses that this is among the very largest concentrations of skilled workers and engineers in the nation. So before we get back to some of the foreign policy developments, I want to focus on the implications of that. What is one of the most pressing challenges that President Trump faces? He has pledged to and must successfully cut inflation drastically, quickly. That means the construction of hundreds and hundreds of new energy plants, both fossil fuel, nuclear, and soon fusion, which will demand the redeployment of our existing skilled workforce and give the country time to begin to educate a new skilled workforce for the future, for the enormous needs of becoming a manufacturing superpower. There can be similar benefits for Russia, which obviously has had to devote a significant part of its economy to war production and has done so successfully. But as anyone knows, building weapons which get destroyed on the battlefield does not ultimately contribute to a productive economy, and the strains on the Russian economy are obvious. It is worth noting that the current Russian defense minister, who was appointed last May, is Andrei Belousov, who has a PhD in economics and whose focus has been on how to transition defense spending into benefits for the civilian Russian economy. His studies and work at the Central Institute for Mathematical Economics intersected the period of time when Lyndon LaRouche was working with Russian scientific and economic layers, discussing precisely the challenge of supercharging the civilian economy with the advanced technological spin-offs from things like the Strategic Defense Initiative. I can't stress how important this is. These are not dry academic discussions of economic formulas or statistics. The very substance of economic discussion is shifting from the British-dominated sphere of money, where their central banking system has control, to a domain where physical production and its effects on advancing civilization becomes the new metric. Look at Energy Secretary Chris Wright's extraordinary speech to the ARC conference last week, where he constantly returned to the correlation between abundant and cheap energy and the living standards of populations. He stressed there are 3 billion people on this planet who wonder where their next meal is coming from or how to stay warm at night. And they're in that situation because they don't have access to modern energy. He also slammed the Western countries for going backwards, in particular Britain and the European countries, saying there's a direct correlation between their not using fossil fuels anymore and the collapse of their economies and their deindustrialization. Two other statements by Wright stand out. He said, energy realism is critical if you want to have humanism. And let's focus on humans again and their lives. This reminds me of a campaign that Lyndon LaRouche launched during the financial crisis of the first decade of this century. He called it People First. Not money, but people. This is going to be an important concept as we move forward in the budget battles in Congress, and it's going to be tough. For more than a century, Congress has been subverted in its economic responsibilities. In the first 100 years plus of our existence, Congress functioned as a facilitator of economic progress, with tariffs and investment in internal improvements and other policies which encouraged production. When this was especially successful, it took place in an environment of a system of national banking, which directed credit into productive areas. With the administration of Woodrow Wilson, the advent of the Federal Reserve, and the introduction of the federal budget process, this changed. Congress has been turned into a checkbook balancer in a world dominated by the financialization of everything. Our physical economy has been parasitized on the altar of monetarist policies, and everything is supposed to be sacrificed to it, including our seniors and our most vulnerable. Donald Trump has made clear that he rejects this, that we can protect and strengthen programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid by creating a robust and prosperous economy. This will put him in direct conflict with a whole lot of Republican congressmen and senators who have been poisoned by monetarist or libertarian policies, all of which spring from the British and secondarily the Austrian schools of economics. We will be covering that conflict as it unfolds, and we're sending a team of Promethean Action organizers to Capitol Hill during the last month of March to begin the process of rehabilitating Congress with our pamphlet, What President Trump Can Learn from the American System 2.0. By becoming a paying member of Promethean Action, you can support that effort. So let's take the conflict between British and American policies back to the foreign policy sphere. On Monday, the UN Security Council passed a resolution on the anniversary of the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine. This AP headline says it all. U.S. refuses to blame Russia for Ukraine war, splitting with European allies in UN vote. The U.S. resolution was passed by a vote of 10-0 in the Security Council, with the United States, Russia, and China voting in favor, and Britain, Denmark, France, Greece, and Slovenia abstaining. The point of confrontation was over the issue of blaming Russia for the war, rather than recognizing, as Trump has, that NATO and the globalists have tragically used Ukraine as a marcher lord to threaten Russia's legitimate national security interests. So, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will be arriving in Washington tomorrow, February 27th, to try and reassert imperial policy in regards to Ukraine, I suspect with little effect. The UK is, of course, all in on continuing this conflict forever, having signed a 100-year treaty with Ukraine back in January, just 4 days before Trump's inauguration. And part of that treaty was giving Britain rights to Ukraine's rare earths and minerals. But it appears that that's going to be superseded, as reports abound today that Zelensky has come to an agreement with the United States over that. Zelensky will be in Washington on Friday, one day after Starmer. So what we are seeing is tectonic shifts in the geopolitical landscape. Think about it. A UN security resolution backed by the United States, Russia, and China, reasserting that the role of the UN is to secure peace in the Ukraine conflict, not come down on one side or the other. This was Franklin Roosevelt's original conception of the UN, which was never realized, that it would be a forum for sovereign nations led by the non-imperial victors of World War II, namely the United States, Russia, and China, who could lead the way to the rapid decolonization of the world and allow for the development of the former colonies once they were decolonized. We have been waiting for 80 years for the prospect of that kind of cooperation and economic development to happen, and now it is possible. Some on the imperial side have discovered that things have changed, and they're trying to pivot. The former head of MI6, Sir Alex Younger, acknowledged in a BBC interview a few days ago, "I don't think we're going back to the world we had before, because the one we had was based on the unipolar moment when America had both the means and the will to assert itself across the world. It created what we called globalization and the international security structure." Now, other British mouthpieces aren't even trying to pivot. They're just in full attack modes, as the Financial Times headline stated above. Here's what British puppet and Soros-connected Liberal candidate for Canadian Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said in a debate yesterday. She said, "The U.S. is turning into a predator, and Canada is going to have to work with democratic and military allies like Denmark and NATO." And she added, "I would be sure that France and Britain were there who possess nuclear weapons, and I will be working urgently with these partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat." Seriously? Britain, Denmark, and Canada against the United States, and implicitly against a four-power alliance of the United States, China, and India that Lyndon LaRouche advocated and President Trump is hinting at? If you want more background on that, check out Will Wurtz's Saturday class on the Promethean Action website. And be sure to sign up, because this revolution is moving fast. This has been your Midweek Update. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com.